Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes. We are the Brute Liberty Labs, who has 103,000. We now have six figures, 103,000 XP earned, 23,000 to go to get to level 20, and 900 plus thousand influence. And we're on a story arc, the Vahzilok Plague, for Olivia Chung, who's going to give us the next mission. If I can click on it, Dr. Vahzilok has a sample of the antidote. Get into the sewers and incinerate every body you find. I don't know if this is the finale. If it is, we will be fighting Dr. Vahzilok. So, we might need to see if we can grab some inspirations before we head out. So let me show you guys, if you have no other place to go, to get inspirations, one quick place. And I can also show you the costume shop as well. But one, going the wrong way, one quick place. So, alright, let's start at the City Hall. See, there is Atlas. Turn this way. There's Icon. Right? That is the place for costumes. And right across the street is the hospital. And if you wander on in, there's a nurse right here by the elevator who will happily sell you whatever inspirations you want. So we're going to grab a couple healths, a couple of catch breath, a couple of enrage. Let's see here. Let's put them where I want them. And then a couple of luck. So this is sort of my standard kit. It should be fine now that we're no longer stuck with the Vahzilok wasting disease. Now we're going to head to Steel Canyon via the train station. The train station is right sort of just down the block from Icon. But you got to go up the little hill here. So much easier when you have flight. In Atlas Park, you're usually doing it when you don't have flight. And we'll head off to Steel Canyon to see if we can incinerate the bodies and put an end to the Vahzilok Plague. I think this might very well be the final storyline, the final mission of the story arc. We're not going to quite get to level 20 from the story arc, but we might get there in this episode. And I think what I'm going to do, guys, is so I'm toying with, I definitely want to end this season and start a new season at some point. The Mr. Monk in me, the Tony Shalhoub in me, wants to start it at level 20 and start the new season at level 20. On the other hand, the City of Heroes player in me says, well, the real change is going to come when we hit level 22 when we get the SOs. I think what I might do is, once we get the SOs, we're going to start a new season. And that season will be, how this character plays with all her SO enhancements in place. We'll also have, I think, one more defensive power, because that's probably what I'm going to pick next. Right, and that will, I think, be Rise to the Challenge. Oh, we definitely want quick recovery, right? This gets us more endurance. That's awesome. So what a lot of people do when they have a power like quick recovery is they don't slot stamina. I've always slotted both, because both will help you, and you can put up to 3 enhancements on both of them and double them both. And we should do a little bit better against these guys now because we're not suffering from the plague, but they're still not going to be super easy to take out because they are the Vahzilok, and they do seem to be very accurate with their vomit, their sewage vomit or whatever it is they're doing. So as we go, let's talk a little bit about the enhancements and about why you only really need 3 single origin, right? Single origin enhancements. Any more than that, and they no longer add bonuses. So that's not how it was when the game launched. When the game launched, oh, there's a boss right there, huh? When the game launched, there were you could put up to 6 slots, and the bonuses worked equally for all 6 slots. So For offensive powers, powers like punching and stuff, energy blasts, the accuracy, the endurance, the recharge, and the damage, all for single origin enhancers, right, which were kind of the best you could get at launch. They all increased the thing by 33%, right, 1/3. And so if you had one of them, right, you were doing 1.33x damage, right? If you had two of them, where's the glowy that I'm hearing? If you had two of them, you did hang on, I'm trying to hear the glowy. It's gotten a little louder. Is it up above me? There it is. If you had one damage single origin enhancer, you went from doing 100 damage to 133 damage, right? 33% improvement. If you had two of them, you went from doing 100 damage to 167 damage. 2 times 33% improvement. If you had three of them, you did basically double damage. You were doing 200 damage instead of 100 damage because it's a third times 3. And you could put up to 6 of the same enhancement in those days. And basically, for the offensive abilities, wow. For the offensive abilities, you could effectively triple the damage. Instead of doing 100 damage, well, look at what these guys are doing to me. And it's just white cons. Jeez. You could do 300 damage instead of 100 damage by putting 6 enhancers, right? So you could have up to 6 slots on your power, and you could have up to 6 damage, and it would all work, and you would be doing 300% damage, right? And the same thing with endurance. You would cut the endurance by 200%, and so on. And so, yeah, obviously you can only do one thing at a time. You can only have one type of enhancement per slot and only 6 slots per power. And for the first, I don't know, 6 months, year of the game, that is how things could work. And so this had consequences for certain powers. For example, what happened is you could put 6 recharges on your powers, right, and really reduce the amount of time it took to recharge a power. If a power took 3 minutes to recharge and you put 6 recharges on it, it would only take 1 minute to recharge. Okay? And so one of the things that happened is in the pool powers, right, we have flight in one of our pool powers. These are the yellow powers. One of the pools is the speed pool. This has, among other things, super speed, and it also has a very low level power that you could take at level 6 called hasten. And hasten did the equivalent of adding, I think, a single origin recharge enhancer to every power in the game. And with the speed with which hasten recharged, it was, and how long it lasted, right, in those days, and I don't know what the numbers were, but let's say it recharged every 2 minutes and 30 seconds, right? And it lasted for a minute. And when you put 6 recharge enhancements on it, it would recharge in like just under a minute, say 50 seconds, and it lasted a minute. And let me show you this. It's possible to control click a power, and you see how it turns green, and then that power will fire every chance it gets. It's like an auto power. And some people do this with Brawl, right? So let me go ahead and control click Brawl, right? And then as soon as we get within range, Brawl will trigger. And every time we have a targeted enemy, Brawl will trigger in between the other punches that I'm doing. Brawl will trigger. You see it triggered again, right? So I'm not going to undo this because I don't like using control click with Brawl, but that's how a lot of people get powers to fire automatically. And I used to do this with Practice Brawler. I'd control click it, and Practice Brawler would just fire every time it recharged. So what people would do is they would control click hasten, right? And that meant that hasten would fire as soon as it recharged. And it would overlap with the previous duration of hasten, because hasten lasts a minute, but after 50 seconds it would fire again, right? And this was called perma haste, right? Permanent hasten. And what it did was it did the equivalent without putting any enhancers in your slots. It did the equivalent of having a 33% recharge enhancer on every single power that has a recharge time. And so it was so good and so efficient to do that basically everybody had perma haste. Once people learned how to do it, all the blasters in my super group, right? People who had flight and super jump as their travel power, they still took hasten, which was the entry into the speed pool, was the low level power in the speed pool. They still took hasten so they could have perma haste, right? And what this did then, of course, was it allowed your other powers to recharge faster. And so now they had powers that even with 6 recharge enhancers, you could not have made them permanent. But with the 7th, equivalent of the 7th recharge from the hasten power, you could. Things like build up, which were slow enough that even 6 recharge enhancers wouldn't make it permanent. With hasten running 2, it was permanent. So you could have perma hasten, perma build up. And so your carrot powers were always doing double damage, or whatever, plus 80% damage, whatever it is that build up does. And they were always, and all your powers were recharging faster than they were supposed to, right? And so, I'm going to get hit by that, aren't I? Yeah. And so, you had perma haste, perma build up, right? The super reflex scrappers could get elude, which was supposed to last for 2 minutes and then have like a 4-minute downtime or something, to be permanent. Perma haste, perma elude, perma focus chi, or whatever, perma build up, right? And so people were making these click powers that were meant to be used as like, what do you want to call it, situationally, right? Situational click powers that you're supposed to use when the time is right. They were really powerful because they were supposed to be situational. They were making them permanent. And this led to some extremely cookie cutter builds. What everybody was doing, right? Because build up can take as enhancements, you can enhance the 2 hit buffs. You could slot build up and put 2 hit buffs on it, right? And you had people, I don't know how they figured out how to do this, but basically using build up permanently for the 2 hit buffs so they could hit. So they didn't need accuracy enhancers. 6 slotting stamina so that they didn't need endurance reducers. 6 slotting and permanent haste so they didn't need rechargers. And so now they're doing build up with 6 damage slotted powers. So they're doing like not even triple damage, but almost quadruple damage, never missing. Hitting, they only needed a few powers because everything recharged so fast. Then everybody was going into the fighting pool, taking boxing, which is a punch power. They didn't care about that, but then they were getting tough and weave, which gave them at the time, I think, plus 15 or something % defense and plus 15 resistance. And then they were 6 slotting the defenses in there. So you had blasters walking around with ridiculous defenses that they could afford to buy because they didn't need to buy as many of their primaries, because they could cycle 3 or 4 primaries because of hasten and build up being permanent and all of the benefits, and 6 slotted stamina, right? And so what the developers did when they saw this is they realized that this is really exploitative. And what was happening was it was making the game way too easy. You had, blasters that could practically tank. You had tankers that were doing way more damage than tankers were supposed to do, and it was making the game. They didn't have a difficulty slider, right? So you couldn't. Um, you didn't make the missions harder, right? You couldn't play it +1 or +2 or whatever. People, guys, were doing stuff like inviting 8 people into their group, entering the mission to spawn it for an 8-man, and then leaving the group. And then soloing the mission for 8 people. And the reason they were able to do it was because they had 6 slotted hasten, they had 6 slotted buildup, they had 6 damage enhancers on their attack powers, and they had tough and weave, and those were 6 slotted for defense and resistance. And it was just absolutely beyond anything the developers had ever expected players to do. And so, and it's unfortunate that this wasn't really sussed out in beta, and it's kind of the fault of the developers. They were warned, essentially. Did I double aggro over here? I guess I did. They were warned by the beta testers. I remember this, that they had not done the beta properly, and they didn't, at the high levels. And so they were warned. They didn't listen. They needed to go live with it to start recouping the money that they had spent on the development. You can understand that, but because of that, they did not adequately test the upper levels, and so people found combinations of things in live that nobody discovered in beta because they didn't let people play the high-level game enough in beta, and they didn't let people do SOs enough in beta. Like, most of the people in beta didn't know about the single origin enhancements or where to buy them, and in the really high levels, you have to like do quests to get the single origin shops, and they're not, I don't know if they at the time were automatically put on your map. You had to sort of discover them. And what they were saying, like in live, was not that many people found this. And so a lot of the people in beta were working on training enhancements at high levels. So even if you 6-slotted something, it would only do 60% extra because it's about 10%. And so this actually caused a problem because they didn't expect it. And so what the developers ultimately did was they did a massive, what they called enhancement diversification, right? The idea was supposed to be they wanted you to put different types of enhancements in your powers. And so they made it so that once you have 3 of a single type of enhancement in your powers, it no longer adds in any measurable way. So you could put 3 damage on your attack powers, and it's plus 99%, right? Plus 100%. But when you put the 4th one, it's like plus 101%. It just doesn't go up that much. And so that's why things in City of Heroes work the way they do. And just to bring us back to the point about the beta. So what happened in beta? All right, what happened in beta is City of Heroes was meant to be a subscription service, right? So they were watching how people were leveling, and they scaled the amount of XP you needed to gain a level by how fast they expected you to gain that level so that they could make sure that you'd keep playing for a large number of months, right? They didn't want what actually happened, where the one guy figured out how to get to level 40, which was the max when the game launched, how to get to level 40 on day 1, right? And he leveled to level 40 on day 1 using an exploit. That's the burn tankers, right? They didn't want that. They were worried about that, so they made it take a really long time to level up. He still managed to do it, but most other people didn't. And so because of that, what happened is most of the people in beta got stuck in the very low levels, right? They didn't get very far naturally. And so the developers are watching this, and time is going on, and they wanted to launch the game, and they said, okay, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to basically everybody who's in the beta, whatever current characters you have, are going to like level up. And we want to level you up to 25 so that you can test like the 25 to 30 game, right? And then at a later point, they said we're going to level you all up to 35 so that you can test the 35 game. And what I can't remember which poster it was, but the one guy was complaining about this. His point was, this isn't a good test because although the characters are level 35, the players aren't. And you have a bunch of people who actually got to level 15 and then they were bumped to 25. This is Dr. Vahzilok. They were bumped to 25 and then they were bumped to 35. But in player experience, they're really only like level 20 players. They didn't know, for example, and he couldn't even point this out because I don't know if he knew it either. They didn't know. We only have one purple. We might be in trouble. They didn't know that you could put SOs in, right? They didn't exactly know how all of this stuff worked, and as a consequence, they weren't playing optimally, right? They were playing very suboptimally. So you had the equivalent of level 15 players, right? Players who are used to level 15 characters suddenly playing level 30 and 25 and 35 characters, and they weren't as effective at their character as someone who had naturally reached level 35, right? They didn't know all of the tricks, all the ins and outs, right? They suddenly got leveled up. I don't know what happened in terms of influence. I guess they suddenly got enough influence to buy enhancements, I guess. I'm not really sure if they did or if they just leveled them up and didn't worry about the enhancements. And the thing is that it's not the powers of a character in City of Heroes that matter. It's the enhancements. This Mortificator just rezzed this abomination because I'm a dummy. What matters are how you enhance the powers. And if you enhance them for damage, that has a very different effect compared to if you enhance them for accuracy, compared to if you enhance them for endurance. Thankfully, we now have a second purple, so that's good. So what I'm going to do is sweep this area and slowly take these guys out. Hopefully without aggroing Dr. Vahzilok, because I don't want to fight him and everybody else. That's no good. Just hugging the wall here. And we will shoot the Reaper. So now I gotta watch out with that guy. So we don't want to attack him over there, because that might aggro Vahzilok. So what happened is the players were leveled up so fast that they were playing like a bunch of noobs at level 35 because they were noobs. And several people on the beta forum tried to convince the developers to let people level up naturally and learn their character, and that if you don't do that, you're not really getting a good look at how this game is going to work in the 30s, because the players in the live game aren't going to be instant leveled up. They're going to actually learn their characters as they go, and they're going to be much more effective at level 35 than the people who were just instant leveled from 25 to 35, right? Because remember, you have to remember, the other thing is, when I got into beta, when I got into the closed beta, they had just, I think, or maybe they hadn't yet, turned the servers on 24/7. Before I got into it, the servers were only on at certain times, right? They'd be on, like, say, 8 to 11 Pacific time, and in the evening, and maybe noon Australia time or whatever. And so they weren't always on, and because they weren't always on, people couldn't play as intensively as they were going to play in live, right? And the consequence of that is they didn't level up as fast either. And so it was taking players a lot of, like, actual days to level up, right? A lot of real life days. And the developers were trying to speed things up in terms of how many days it was taking to do the testing, but the players needed real time of experience to get good at the game, right? You can level me up really fast, But if I don't practice as an actual person in the game, it really almost doesn't matter what level I am. Right? A new player would probably get killed in this mission, would have been killed already. Right? I know what I'm doing. I know how to pull. I know what my character is capable of. I know which inspirations to bring with me into a mission. Right? I have a kit, as I said. Well, how do I have a kit? It's from experience. Right? Right? I even know this little trick of just inching toward them. And so I'm able to pull the entire army protecting Dr. Vahzilok out of the room. Right? I can pull them out of the room and they don't aggro him. Well, now this guy's going to aggro him because he's getting lost and he's stupid. But yeah, I can pull most of these guys out. Now, this is probably going to aggro Vahzilok. But I know how the aggro works. And I know what I'm doing with this guy, right? He's a red conning elite boss. He's level 19. We're going to chow down on some defense. We're just going to go get him. I know we've got a couple of these other guys here, but we'll try to hit them with our AoEs. We got to watch our health and just hit him as hard as we can. We might not be able to beat him, but my point is, like, a new player wouldn't know how to do this stuff, right? I'm not saying I'm some sort of a genius, right? But I've fought Dr. Vahzilok before a bunch of times, and I know how to run scrappers and broods and so forth, and I played these guys into the 50s, so I know what I'm doing, right? A new player wouldn't know it, how to do it, and would never have it that easy, right? Again, I'm not trying to say I'm great, but I have experience, and that cannot be substituted by just making my character 40th level. And so what happened is that the actual experienced players were just whipping through the content, and they were complaining it was too easy. And it was too easy because it had been scaled to fight against players who didn't have experience, and were using trainers and DOs at level 35 instead of SOs. Right? And the developers just did not realize how much of an easy time we were going to have it with things like perma-haste and perma-elude and all of that other kind of stuff. We are now very close to level 20. So we're going to try to finish that tonight, but let's go sell our enhancements, and Science Shop is nearby, so we'll just go there. So yeah, it's sort of a cautionary tale. And several of the players in beta were begging the developers to wait a little longer to launch the game and let people, naturally level and see what happens. And the developers were like, we can't, we've got a target date. It's based on how much money they needed to make. And, they had been developing the game for like 3 or 4 years, and they didn't have any more money to keep developing it without some kind of income, and so they had to go live with it. And as a consequence, let's see, what do we got here? Should we use the SO? I guess so. So this is 17%, this is 33, so yeah, we'll just move that out, move that in. So as a consequence of the need to get some income, right, they sped up the beta leveling, and that led to a whole bunch of changes that had to be made in the live game, causing a lot of complaints and arguments and everything else, because players don't like it when you nerf things and so on and so forth. So the idea of enhancement diversification was that even though you've got 6 slots, you're not going to have 6 damage, right? It doesn't make sense to do that because you can't do perma haste, you can't do perma buildup. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to have 6 slots in your energy melee, and you'll have an accuracy, 3 damage, endurance, recharge, right? So it looks diverse. But the reality is that almost everybody slots that exact way. There are tweaks to it, but the most common way to slot an attack power, like a melee attack power, is 1 accuracy, 3 damage, 1 endurance, 1 recharge. Because those first enhancements give you the most bang for the buck. Now I will sometimes, I'll have a couple of my attacks be double accuracy and not have the recharge on them, because once you have about 6 attacks, you can generate a full chain without needing the recharges. And the double accuracy, those are the powers I will call on when I'm being debuffed for my 2 hit. Now they don't mean that you're automatically going to hit, but it will help a little bit. All right, let's see who we're going to pick as a contact. Let's go to Skyway City. Let's try Chow. Oh, wait, Vitali. I don't remember who gives what. Let's try Vitali, actually, because I'm pretty sure he does give a story arc. How are we doing on influence? Have we hit 1 million yet? Not yet. We'll certainly have over 1 million by the time we get to level 22, and that should be more than enough for us to get all of our SOs set up. We're probably still going to have to sell some orange salvage to do the level 27 single origins. But at that point, it takes so many XP to level up that you start catching up in how much influence you're earning. So let's go to Skyway City. We're going to go to the south of Skyway City because... oh gosh, guys. I've completely forgotten a story arc. And I think we need to do it now. We're not going to do Vitali. I forgot all about Fault Line. Let's do Fault Line. Let's do that story arc. This is one of the newer ones, and I actually really like it a lot. We're going to skip this one. I don't remember what Vitali gives you, but instead we're going to go to Overbrook, which is what Fault Line was called before it became Fault Line. And it was smashed by a villain, and this storyline, if I can get it, will tell you why. So the first person on the story arc, there's like a series of story arcs, and the first contact is over here somewhere. Where is he? Right there. And it's got a little yellow arrow, so I think we've got him. I think you can do him before 19. And then the next arc is level 20. Yes, we've got available missions. Rumblings of the Past. So this is where we're going to figure out what happened. This guy's name is Jim Tembler, and his father was, I think, called Fault Line. I can't remember the name of his father. But he's got this really goofy friend named Fusionet who was trying to help him. And Fusionet's been cornered by some villains, and we got to go help her out. Now, Fusionet's really dumb. She's a blaster, and she's like... some of it's just the AI is pretty bad, but what I love about Fusionet is if you watch how she plays, which is to just follow you around and just blast everything in sight, that's pretty much the way people played blasters when City of Heroes launched. I remember one of the more popular things to do, and you can't see this when I'm playing alone, but if you're playing with me and you target my character, you click on my character and target it. You can't self-target, but you click on my character like that and target it. And then I target an enemy. Your target then of your attacks then becomes my target. It's target of target. And so what you could do is, it's called assisting, right? We both attack the same guy. And so blasters used to be super lazy. They would target tanks and scrappers and then just start blasting. And they knew that whatever you were hitting, they would hit too. And they did not understand why it used to really tick off the scrappers. The tankers, I don't know if they cared that much. There weren't a lot of tankers on my group except me. When I was a tanker, I didn't really care. But it really ticked me off as a scrapper. Because a lot of the blasters were energy blasts. They were doing all this knockback. So, and if you try to attack somebody in melee and he's out of range, you get this, out of range complaint, right? And so I would be punching somebody and all of a sudden he would get knocked, 10 feet back, and I'd have to run after him. And the blasters were often not paying any major attention to their positioning, at least the ones on my group and the ones that I randomly teamed with in when we were looking, looking for group. They would blast these guys right back into the next spawn, and I would not realize it. I would chase them around the corner, right? I would chase them, and there's another spawn right here, and then I get caught in that spawn. And the blasters are just blasting away, right? And mindlessly, essentially. And the players of the scrappers in particular, used to get really frustrated. And so, Fusionette, if you watch how she acts, I don't think she targets me, but if you watch how she acts, where she just basically mindlessly blasts everything in sight, it's it's done because that's just how all of their AI is coded, and the AI is always pretty kind of one-dimensional. But that's literally how a lot of the people I knew played blasters back when the game first launched. They would just target your target and just start blasting. And I think I've said this before, but I remember going onto our supergroup forum and saying to them, like, making a post about aggro and saying, look, guys, as a scrapper, I have no ability to taunt, and I have no ability to pull aggro off of somebody else. Do not target what I'm attacking, because if you do and you pull it off me, I'm going to assume, how did I say this? I said, if you draw aggro off of me, I'm going to assume you want it. I'm going to let you have it. I'm not going to run back and try to chase the thing down. I'm just going to switch targets. And if something runs after you, you can handle it because you're the one who pulled the aggro off me. Don't pull aggro. And yeah, I was kind of considered a bit of a jerk by the blasters, but I said, you don't realize how frustrating it is to have a target right in front of you and then have it get knocked all over the battlefield and I have to chase it around. Or I am up in the middle of the fight with 5 or 6 guys and I'm doing my AoEs and stuff, and one of them gets pulled off me and starts running back to the group over here, and I have to disengage with my guys and run back here and try to protect the blasters. I mean, I did try to do it for a really long time, and I didn't mind doing it if they accidentally pulled the aggro, but when they were being lazy and just targeting me and just blasting, that irritated me. And I said to them, look, if you pull aggro off me when I'm working on a boss or something, I'm going to assume you want it and I'm going to let you have it. They eventually learned. And I remember having this conversation, like, don't you want the help? And I'm like, I'm a scrapper. I don't need the help. I can do damage just as well as anybody else. And I think part of the problem was a lot of them were used to, when they teamed outside of our supergroup, they were used to teaming with tankers who really couldn't do much, if any, damage, and the tankers were perfectly happy to have the help, right? But scrappers don't need it. The other thing I remember very distinctly was one of the defenders who was an empathy defender, empathy Psi, I believe. And so empathy had a lot of heals, which many of the other defenders didn't. Single target heals where she would, like, you could target the person and heal them. And I remember her saying she really liked teaming with scrappers because she got a chance to use her heal, right? Whereas with tankers, there was no need for a heal because the tankers had such good defenses that they were better off if you could, like, play a buff on them, which empathy didn't do very well. Empathy was much better at the healing rather than the buffing. So that a lot of tankers, groups with tankers preferred to have, and there's level 20, they preferred to have different power sets and not empathy as a defender because they really didn't need the healing. So she said, I really love you scrappers because you guys need the healing. This was when I was like 16th level. Right, you come back when I'm like 28th level, and she's like, you don't need healing anymore. I'm like, no, I don't. Once you get your defenses in as a scrapper or a brute, you really don't need the healing because you can pretty much handle anything by yourself. So yeah, what Fusionette's going to act like, I don't know if she's going to have much opportunity to do it because it looks like we're near the end of this map, but what she acts like is pretty much a simulation of, without them intending to do it, right? It wasn't like they said we're going to deliberately make her act like the blasters from launch, but she absolutely does act the way the blasters from launch act. I remember them saying, there's no such thing as kill stealing in City of Heroes. It's all fine. You'll get the XP. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand. As a scrapper, it's not satisfying to me to make one hit on an enemy and then switch to another and switch to another and never actually get the satisfaction, see, she did it to me here, of taking them down. And their attitude was, well, it's a group effort, right? We're all working together on this. Who cares who took them down? Like, yeah, you don't feel like it's frustrating because you're taking them down. So we had a lot of arguments about that. I mean, friendly arguments. We weren't mad at each other or anything. But you see what just happened, right? She knocked him out of the way, and I switched targets. She did it again, right? So now I have to chase him. And it's not that big of a deal with these two guys, but when you're on an 8-man team and you're in a big spawn and you're constantly having to switch and chase guys around, and then the blaster is knocking them into the next spawn because they were utterly clueless about, they didn't care if they aggroed another spawn. The tanker was going to mop up all that aggro, or the controller would lock it down. But if they were on a team that didn't have those guys, or if those guys weren't effective enough, it was supposedly the responsibility of the scrappers and the tankers to clean up that aggro. I'm like, yeah, but you're generating it. Now, to some degree, they can't help it because damage generates aggro, right? Aggro is aggression toward you. And so they kind of can't help it. But look at her. She went to the next spawn while I was still fighting this spawn. There was utterly no need to do that. But it is absolutely the sort of thing that blasters used to do when I was first playing City of Heroes. Like, they were notorious for it on the scrapper part of the forum. It was a constant complaint. There was, I will say, there was quite a bit of rather kind of bitter acrimony between the blasters, defenders, controllers, and the tankers and scrappers, and particularly the scrappers. But the tankers also. Right, I do remember a tanker getting on the forums and really making a very beautiful, eloquent post about how lazy it is to just target him and then just shoot whatever he's targeting. And he's like, why can't you figure out what to target? I do. And he said, as a tanker, I'm constantly switching targets to maintain aggro, so it's super inefficient for you guys to target what I'm targeting because you're never going to take anything out. Now, we do not have a taunt here, which means that I cannot protect her. You see what she's doing, though? Knocking these guys back. You see? There again, right? Just constant KB. This is Energy Blast, and Energy Blast does a lot of knockback, and it was one of the most popular blaster archetype, blaster power sets. I think because you got that AoE that looks like a bunch of arrows coming out. You got that fairly early in the set back then. I don't know if you still do. And so the blaster players really liked that. One of the things that I always found hilarious was I had friends who did things like played scrappers and tankers and controllers, and they were very careful and meticulous and stuff when they played. And then you let them play a blaster. I used to say they get behind the wheel of a blaster, and they just became completely disregarded any sort of tactics or strategy and just blast everything in sight. Georgia Fields, I don't remember her. Next mission. Alright, so this is a level 19 story arc, so we might not be able to get level 20 missions. We do have a level 20. I don't know if it'll go above 20. It's a good thing I remembered this, guys, or I would have completely forgotten to do it, and once we hit level 20, I don't know if you could get on these story arcs. So we have to help FusionNet. This is actually very convenient because we're going to come over here. This is the level up character. Mirror Spirit. I love her design. I've always really liked the way this character looks. I think she looks really cool. And we will train up to a new level of power. Oh, yeah, we're going to get quick recovery. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Right, so that's going to severely help our endurance recovery. Right, so if we go into our enhancements, quick recovery gives us plus 30% recovery without enhancers, and stamina gives us plus 25%, right? The secondary is also always better than the power pool. So we can get this up to plus 50% and this up to plus 60%, guys. We're going to be at almost like double recovery. It's going to be awesome. But we will be doing that in a future level. For now, I think we will stop here. I hope you enjoyed my trip down memory lane about blasters and the enhancement diversification. Maybe one of the next episodes I'll talk about the global defense nerf, the GDN, and we can talk a little bit more about the hasten nerf and that sort of thing. But we'll leave that to another episode. And again, if you guys have any questions about the history of City of Heroes, why they did certain things, how certain things work, I'll do my best to explain them, and you can just post them in the comments, and I will answer them as soon as I see them. Until next time, folks, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.